Now, the long-running public inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s has been hearing its closing statements. It's now believed that about 30,000 people were infected with HIV or hepatitis C after receiving blood transfusions or taking a drug imported from the US to control haemophilia. The inquiry has taken evidence from 370 witnesses. Its recommendations are expected later this year. Here's our health reporter, Jim Reid.
Nobody in the Threakall household ever dreamt they could be affected by AIDS.
In 1991, the BBC broadcast this landmark documentary about the AIDS crisis.
I had a blood test which the hospital confirmed was HIV.
Bob Threakall was infected after being given a contaminated drug for the blood disorder haemophilia.
You know, you see things on television. It's so far removed from everything you know. You don't even consider that you could be part of anything like that, but you can.
Now a retired teacher, Sue has spent decades trying to find out what happened and what was known about the risks.
Over that time we have battled MPs, various parliamentarians, civil servants, the medical profession, the pharmaceutical company. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Those are on Croy.
Bob died just months after that programme was filmed.
So that would have been about 87, 88?
Yeah, about 87.
He was one of thousands infected with HIV or hepatitis after taking drugs imported from abroad or being given a transfusion.
It's just sad, isn't it? Because it's this life that I was living perfectly happily, and then it went, everything went.
Long-running protests eventually led to a government apology and the launch of a full public inquiry.
I would like to say sorry on behalf of the government for something that should not have happened.
Since 2018,
I swear by Almighty God,
Prime Ministers and Health Secretaries have all been questioned under oath.
It became more and more real and more scary.
And those directly affected, including Sue, have been given the chance to have their say.
We're fed up with hearing people say how sorry they are.
This afternoon we'll see the final closing statements with a full report expected in the summer.
I would like the truth out there. I'd like to know that proper measures are put in place to make sure that this can't happen again. It was cataclysmic, you know, and it just ripped families apart, including mine.
Late last year, the first compensation payments were made to some of those affected. After 40 years, though, many families are still hoping for answers as this long-running public inquiry draws to a close. Jim Reid, BBC News.
Jim is actually here with me now. It's taken such a long time to get to this stage for those victims of this awful tragedy to have their day in the equivalent of court.
Yeah, that's right. I think when you look at the numbers, this is the thing that always gets me with this public inquiry. When you look at the numbers, they're quite stark, to say the least. So 30,000 people they now think were infected in the 70s and 80s with either HIV or hepatitis, and 3,000 lives lost. And the point always being made when you talk to campaigners, victims and relatives is that because this happened over such a long period of time, I mean, they call hepatitis C the silent killer because it can take decades for symptoms to emerge. Because it took such a long period of time, it maybe hasn't had the same impact, at least, or the same attention from the press, from politicians, as if there had been one disaster which had cost, obviously, so many lives.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why campaigners say they're really happy to have this public inquiry, because it's been an opportunity for them to air their stories and their experiences.
The results aren't going to be for a while. What is the sanction? What finding could lead to any level of culpability?
Well, it's interesting. So Andy Burnham, now the Mayor of Manchester, but he was a Health Secretary, has campaigned hard on this subject. And he gave evidence to the public inquiry himself and said that he thinks there is possibly grounds here for corporate manslaughter charges.
Right.
That would have to come further down the line. Right. In the meantime, I think what the campaigners and the victims want is a full apology. There's been an apology from government and ministers, but they want a more fulsome apology, at least that spells out exactly what went wrong. And they want some explanation of why action wasn't taken at the time. Now, this gets into some of the details, but for example, at the time, we now know, because of this inquiry, there was a letter that went out from the head of the Communicable Diseases Authority in the UK to the Department of Health in 1983, warning about haemophiliacs dying because of AIDS, and saying that all these blood products being imported from the United States should be pulled, should be removed from circulation. Now, that wasn't acted on at the time. And in fact, it was 2 years later, it was 1985, when they finally started heat treating some of these medications to make sure the viruses were killed. And so what the campaigners say is, look, either people knew about this or they should have known about this. And that's the kind of detail, the kind of judgment they want from the inquiry at the end of all this.
Sure, and that's where the possible, alleged corporate manslaughter charge could come. All right, Jim, thank you. Jim Reid there.